These are the instructions for the Tortoise Tally gearbox pit. So, step 1. Find parts 15 and 16. And all parts will need any tabs sanded off, tabs that are connecting them to the parts sheet. So sand off those tabs so that they don't get in the way of the mechanisms and stop them running smoothly. It also says to sand and wax these edges lined in green. These are the edges that will be rubbing inside the bore of our gear, so make sure those are sanded smooth and then rubbed with wax. So rub your stick of wax over those edges, just these short edges. And now these will be assembled like so, with the shorter protrusion going down. So let's glue that. And into this slot. Push those parts together and tidy up the excess glue with a brush. I have a jar of water with a couple of different brush sizes. It's a good idea to clean off excess glue, otherwise you might end up gluing moving parts and stopping the mechanisms from working. Make sure there's no glue on this bottom face, because that will be rubbing on a wooden surface and will stop the mechanism from working if it becomes glued stuck. So just rub any glue off those edges. Now we can take our base. It's going to fit in like this. So let's put some glue on that. So just put your glue in these internal corners. You don't want to put the glue on this bottom edge, just on these shorter edges. Clean away any excess glue. You don't want glue around these parts, otherwise they might end up causing your gear to not move freely. And now we're going to take that gear. So sand off any tabs on the gear. It's important not to have any tabs on the gear teeth, otherwise they'll bind when the gears are meshing. And sand inside that bore, make sure there's no tabs in the bore. We need that to run smoothly as well and not catch. Now we're going to wax the teeth, the inside, center hole, and the faces on both sides, so everything gets a good wax. So wax this face, Turn the part over and wax the other face. This wax is important for lubrication, making all the parts move smoothly. Wax that inside bore, inside that hole, and wax the teeth. Don't be afraid to use lots of wax. Now we're going to find our 5.5mm long dowels, and we want 3 of them, and we're going to glue those dowels into these holes. So apply some glue into those holes. Pushing your dowels until they hit the table surface behind. You want it to be flush on the other side. Just turn that over, check that they're flush. Clean away any excess glue. Clean it with your brush and then wipe it off with your paper towel. Now we can place this gear onto the base. So make sure that this axle, this cross piece, is at this dot and your handle is pointing to the left. Then find the dot on the gear and line that up with the dot on the base. Now we can locate part 17, sand off any tabs as usual, and that will push on with no glue. Now we can find our leg pieces, so the leg with the tail, and sand off any tabs. Some tabs on these rounded areas. It's important that those are nice and smooth. Now we want to sand a chamfer on these legs. These will stop them catching on these outer teeth later on. So orient it as you can see in the picture, and these top edges, legs and toes, will all get a chamfer on them, so a sort of rounded edge. And the other side. And now wax the edges and faces both sides. So we'll wax the faces. turning it over, waxing the other face, and waxing all of the edges and these chamfered sanded edges that we just made. And now we can put these legs in place. So they're just going to sit like this for now. So they're not sitting on this dowel, they're just sitting beside it. And our chamfered edge is resting on these gear teeth. Now find your other legs, and we're going to sand chamfer on them also. And that chamfer, we're going to line it up as you can see in the picture, and chamfer these two edges with our sandpaper. Once you have a nice chamfer, then we're going to wax the faces and edges. Now we can put our front legs in place with those chamfers to the outside along these gear teeth, and this little lug that our neck will attach to coming towards us, and that will sit. Just place it on top for now. So our three dowels are still visible. Okay, so find this part and sand off any tabs. Then find your 5.5mm long dowels, and we're going to glue those into these holes. Make sure you're gluing them on the right side, so your pointy bit is pointing to your left. Push them all the way down until they touch the surface underneath. So you want it flush on the other side. Clean away your excess glue. And clean away excess glue on this other side where the dowels are protruding. It's important not to have any excess glue, or you might end up making the legs stick to this piece and then they won't move. And it says to wax the edge of this point. This will be the point which pushes on our counting mechanism, so we can give that some lubrication. Now flip it over, make sure these dowels are flush, and we're going to slide it down so that these holes fall into the leg holes. And at the same time you want the cross to come together. Just make sure your dowels aren't getting pushed out of place. So we can apply some glue to the center disc and the walls of the crosspiece. Little pointy part to the left, and the gear in this position shown with the two dots lined up. So line that up with the dowels going through the leg holes and the cross going through the cross hole. And push that down, make sure your dowels are still flush. Now you can turn the gear to check the motion, and your legs should get pushed around into a walking motion. Check those legs aren't getting stuck on the outside gear teeth. If they are, you might need to give them a bit more of a sand and a wax. More of a chamfer. That looks good. Okay, find this piece and sand off any tabs. Make sure your tortoise is back at this position. Let's glue that in place. And your other cross piece, sanding off any tabs. Glue that in place. Make sure that this dowel is flush. If it's not, then our neck might get caught on it and not move freely. So we'll just give that a sand until it's flush, so it won't catch our neck as his head moves side to side. Could even put a bit of wax on that. And now we'll find our neck. Sand off any tabs. Put some glue on that piece. Don't put any glue on this longer edge because that will be sliding over this area here. We only want it on these little short edges, which will push into the leg hole. Now if your legs are falling away and not allowing you to keep the neck all the way in the hole, you can get another part that you're not needing for the time being and just push that underneath the legs slightly to hold them up while the glue dries. Okay, find this piece, sand off any tabs, place some glue on the supports and push the top of his shell into place. And you can find the outside of his shell, the side pieces, the ones with these slots. Sand off any tabs. And you can put some glue on each of these edges to each side of the tab. And push those shell pieces on. Now find the shell pieces that don't have slots. Sand off any tabs. And we can glue these into the remaining holes, but not the neck hole. Push these on carefully so you don't push them in too far and they get stuck inside of his shell. And you can put a bit of glue now on the top edge. We're going to use a paintbrush to make all this glue wick in after we've put our blobs on. So now take your damp wet paintbrush and just lightly wet in that glue. If you find one of the pieces gets pushed in too far, then gently pull it back out again. Might want to use a toothpick to help you, and place it back down carefully. Now find the shell piece with the neck hole and sand off any tabs. Apply some glue and rest that in place. Again, you can put a bit of glue on afterwards. And use a wet brush to spread it about. Now we can find the head of our tortoise. Apply some glue to the neck and to the hole on the head. Locate the mouth, a little notch cut in the head, and make sure that's pointing forward while you glue it on. Now you can find the snail. Sand off any tabs. You might like to draw a little picture, some eyes and a snail shell on him before you glue him on. When you're ready, put some glue on these long edges and push him into this hole in the moving gear. Now we can set this base aside and let the glue dry for 30 minutes. Find the backboard and sand off any tabs. Sand off tabs inside of the slot. Give this slot a good sand. We'll have a moving part in here, so we want to make it nice and smooth. Now we're going to wax the entire face, this unprinted face. Give the whole thing a wax because we're going to have our counting mechanisms sliding about over this face. And wax the inside edges of this slot. So flip it back over so the unprinted face is upwards. Find your three 20mm long dowels. We're going to put these dowels into this top left hole, this center hole above the eyes, and this hole to the side of the mouth. Okay, so apply some glue. Be careful not to get any glue on this face around the dowels. Put the dowels in, give them a twist to spread that glue about. Push them all the way in so they're flush on the other side. Check those dowels are standing perfectly upright. Clean away any glue on the other side. And make sure those dowels are flush. And clean away any excess glue on this side as well. We don't want it to glue our moving gears. Now find the 11.5mm dowel that will go to the left of his eye, and the 9mm dowel that will go to the right of his other eye. We can glue them in place. Again, be careful not to get any glue on the face of our backboard. Clean away any excess glue. And make sure those dowels are flush. And clean away any excess glue on this side where the dowels are protruding. We don't want to glue our mechanisms in place, otherwise they won't move. Okay, find this piece, sand off any tabs. Glue these short edges. Might want a bit of glue on the faces around the edge. And push that into place. And find this piece, sand off any tabs. That will go on the bottom. Apply lots of glue to this piece. It will have our rubber bands on it, so it's helpful to have it glued nicely. You don't need any glue on this bottom edge yet because there's no surface for it to touch just yet. Make sure that's pressed up in this direction all the way and down. Find 4 of these spaces. Sand off any tabs. Place glue on one face and I'm going to push a spacer down on this very top left dowel all the way down to the bottom of the backboard. Careful not to get any glue on these dowels as you're doing this, and we'll glue on another spacer. Just glue on the one face, turn that over, slide that down on top of the first spacer. We'll do the same to this dowel by his mouth. Glue on one face, push all the way down, glue on another face, and push that all the way down onto the first spacer. Now we can find our small gear pieces. Sand off any tabs. It's important to make sure the gear teeth aren't restricted. Now we're going to wax the top face of this gear with 4 teeth and wax all of the edges of this gear. Place it down so your waxed face is still to the top. And now we're going to wax a face of this other gear. Wax the teeth. And now turn it over so that your waxed face is downwards. We're going to glue this gear on top. Just clean away any wax you might have on there. So turn it over to your unwaxed side and apply some glue. Turn it over and place that down on the unwaxed side of this gear. Now it's important that these gear teeth and the hole line up very accurately. So to make that hole line up accurately, we can place it over a dowel for the time being. That will get the hole lined up, and then you can focus on lining up the gear teeth. Now you can carefully lift it off from the bottom gear. Place it aside to dry. Okay, locate this piece, sand off any tabs, Now we're going to sand a chamfer on this edge around the notch. So the reason we do this is so that the teeth of our small gear we just made don't get stuck on this edge. So if we sand a chamfer for about 20 millimeters on each side of the notch, then that will help guide the gear teeth past this area and they won't get stuck. So this is an important step for making the counting mechanism work properly. So that's one edge, and now 20 millimeters of chamfer on this edge, right up to the slot. Put a bit of wax on those edges as well. Okay, find this part, sand any tabs, then locate this very small dowel, 2.5 millimeter diameter dowel. Sand a bit of a taper on the points, that will make it easier to push in place. and that will be pushed into this hole. If you find that hard to push in, just sand a bit more of a taper on it. We can glue that in place, so put some glue on your hole. And push in that dowel till it's flush with the bottom. Clean off any excess glue. Now locate this piece with your numbers on it. Sand any tabs. Okay, and we're going to assemble these three pieces together. So on the bottom goes a small gear with the alignment dowel, and then we will have this wheel with the notch. Make sure the chamfered edge that you did around the notch is facing upwards, and then we'll have this piece with the numbers. So you can put some glue on the top face of this small gear. And on the underside, the unprinted side of this wheel, and we can push on this wheel with the chamfered edge upwards and push on that alignment pin. And making sure that your center hole is also aligned, and then push on the printed piece onto the alignment pin. You want to make sure all of your center holes are aligned and they're all on that alignment pin. So the teeth here, that notch, must be lined up. So move your pieces until they line up. And you can put that over a dowel to make sure that everything's lined up. All those holes are lined up. And the teeth are lined up. And take that off and leave it to dry for 30 minutes. Okay, find this triangular piece, sand off any tabs. And you want to wax this face, but don't wax this protruding part here around this hole, because we're going to be gluing there. We don't want any wax, we will be gluing. So just put your hand over that and wax the rest of that face. find your 5mm dowel, and that will be glued into this hole here. So place some glue in the hole. Careful not to get glue on the faces, and push in your dowel. Push the dowel all the way in until it's flush with the other side. Clean away any excess glue. We don't want glue here to bind our other moving parts. Wipe any excess glue away with your paper towel. And now take this piece and sand off any tabs. Now it's important that you get this part put on correctly, so you want your protruding dowel to be up towards you and to the right, and you want the little hook on this piece to be up towards you. It's going to push on like so, but we can put some glue in that slot first. And you want lots of glue on this part. If this part is too wobbly, then our counting mechanism does not end up working properly. You can put a bit of glue on this area as well. So be sure you've got the orientation correct. The hook is up towards you, and the protruding dowel is also up towards you. And slide this on. And you can slide it all the way on until it clicks into the little hole. So make sure it's all the way up. And it's important for this to be a strong, not wobbly join, so I even found that making sort of a fillet of glue can make that this join a bit stronger. So that looks like a ridiculous amount of glue, but it does seem to help stabilize that piece. But just be careful you don't get glue up around this face or up along these edges. And make sure that that part is perpendicular at right angles to this other part. And set that aside to dry. Now we can put on our small gear. So slide that on to this dowel in between his eyes and we can take our numbered assembly, rotate that so the numbers are pointing downwards, and find this notch, and you want to make sure that there is not a gear tooth in this notch. You want this gear tooth to be just sitting beside this gear tooth, not inside, not between the two gear teeth, but to the side. So if you slide it onto the dowel, rotate this small one until it drops down, allowing this radius to fit in between these two gear teeth on the 4 gear toothed piece. Rotate it until it starts to push your small gear, and then rotate it back towards you. So there's no gear tooth in this notch. Now we can take our other numbered gear, sand off any tabs. Don't want tabs on our gear teeth, otherwise they won't mesh and turn smoothly. And you can wax the faces, both sides, and the edges. So give this printed face a wax. Turn it over and wax the unprinted face. And then wax the gear teeth. Now rotate this so the printed face is down, and you want our number 0 to be visible inside of this eye hole. Then we can slide it over the dowel. Want the number 0 to be visible over this eye hole. So that's this gear tooth here. And slide it onto our dowel. Now just hold these down gently as you turn it over to check that yes, the number 0 is in his left eye. Turn it back over. Now we can find these 3 pieces. I had this piece holding the tortoise's neck up. You might have it there too, but we shouldn't need that there now. And sand off any tabs. Sand then wax this edge well. So that's this curved edge. If we give that good sand, then it means that this point won't have too much friction as it slides across it, and our counting mechanism will work smoothly. wax that edge really well. Wax all edges and faces both sides on all three pieces. So all edges can get waxed, and all faces. Could give this point just a light sand as well, and wax that point really well. And you could give this point a little bit of a sand. And wax that point really well. Now we can lay these pieces on. So this piece will rest in place. This piece, notice how it's different to this piece. This one has the larger drum near the hole. This one is smaller, so it's going to go on the dowel by the mouth. Check these are nice and loose. If they're too tight, you might need to roll up some sandpaper and widen these holes slightly. And this little point is going to fit inside the notch on this piece. And this piece will slide over this top left dowel, and its point will go into a notch in this gear. Now find 4 spaces, sand off any tabs, no glue needed. We're going to put 1 spacer on this top left dowel. Push that on not too far. We don't want to squeeze this piece, we want it to move freely, but far enough to stop it wobbling. And another spacer on the dowel by his mouth, and push it on far enough to retain it. We don't want it to be really wobbly, but not so far that it is hard to move. If you pull it away, you don't want it to drop down too far and not be able to get back into that notch. So push it down far enough to stop it wobbling, but not so far that it squeezes this piece and makes it stiff and difficult to move. Another spacer over our small gear. Again, push that down far enough so that it is not too wobbly, so that it is retained and does not wobble, but then not so far that it gets squeezed and it's hard to move. So just pull it back up slightly if it's, so just leaving a slight gap so it's still loose and moves freely. And push another spacer over our other larger gear far enough so that it's not wobbly but is still able to move freely, so don't pinch this gear. Now you don't need to put any glue on these 3 retainers, but you can put some on the retainer above this larger gear. So just squeeze some glue over the top, and then you can use a wet brush to let that glue wick in to the cracks, and that should be enough to retain that gear. Now we can take this part that we prepared earlier, flip it over so this protruding dowel is pointing downwards, and the hook on this piece is also pointing downwards. And to get this in, we can rotate it and slip that hook piece into the mouth slot, and then rotate it back again so that the notch in the hook is now in the slot of the mouth. And now we're going to slip these dowels into the holes at the top, and this dowel is going to go into the hole on this piece underneath. So move that about until that lines up and slips in. And no glue on this piece. Now you're going to take two of these 60mm 1.5mm rubber bands and take one of them, hook it into the notch on this piece. Take the other one and do the same. So we have two of them hooked into that notch. And then we're going to pull them around through the notches in this piece and into the notch in this piece. I need to do them one by one to get those to slip in. Now take this long retainer, sand off any tabs, and we're going to push that down onto this dowel by the mouth and this top left dowel. Now don't push that on too far. You don't want to squeeze the mechanisms and stop them moving, but you want it on far enough to retain this piece so it doesn't wobble about too much. And now take another retaining spacer piece, sand off any tabs, and push that down on the middle dowel. Again, don't push it on too far that you pinch this piece. You want a little bit of play, a little bit of a gap to allow this rocking arm to move freely. Now make sure that the point in this piece here, underneath this piece, is fitting into one of the notches in this notched wheel, and that will make it lock into the correct position. And then give this arm a little wiggle, and you'll notice that this piece is about to engage with a notch in that wheel. Now, and when you push it the other way, it's about to engage in a notch on the wheel with this tooth. So at the moment it's not quite getting into its notch, it's not quite lining up. And this can just be to do with slight inaccuracies in how everything gets aligned as we make it. So there's some option to fine tune here. So push this lever to the right so that you can see where that tooth's about to line up. Now if I give that a little push, it's going to slip into place and it's going to make that wheel rotate. And then this tooth, this point, will slip into a notch in this wheel and locate it, and then we bring it back. This piece comes back up ready to engage again. But at the moment, without my help, it's not quite getting in there. It's just slipping past. So we're going to push it slightly to see where it touches and put a mark where the edge of that notch is. So we've got a bit too much material on that tooth. And then push it this way and have a look at the other tooth. It's also not quite getting into that notch, so put a mark where the edge of that notch is. And if we remove that bit of material, it should then fit into that notch. So now we're going to remove this retainer, because we didn't glue it on. You might like to pry it off with something like a pair of scissors. And then slip out this dowel from the hole and remove this piece. And now we'll cut off those areas where there is a bit too much material. Still want a nice straight edge there so that it can grip our notched wheel. We still want a nice right angle, otherwise it might slip out of our notched wheel. Now let's put it back into our model and see how those changes have affected it. So slide that dowel back in. Bring that point back into the notch. Push on the retainer. So let's check our mechanism again. When we push this lever to the right, checking that the tooth engages with the wheel, pulls it round to the right until this point falls into a notch in the wheel. Then we can bring it back. So now that's working correctly. And we'll try it in the other direction, so when we push our lever to the left, this tooth should engage with a notch. That's good, and push the wheel around clockwise until this point engages with a notch to retain the wheel. And the other way. Right, so that's working nicely now. And if this keeps slipping off, make sure that you've got this pushed down far enough. Now when you're sure this mechanism is working properly, then you can retain these pieces with some glue here, here and here just by putting it on the edge around the dowel. But this is tight enough that I'm not going to retain it with any glue. That allows us to pull it back and adjust it if we need to. Now I'm going to take our little nose piece, sand off any tabs, and that will push in from the printed side. So put some glue in those corners. Push in that nose and clean away any excess glue. Now we can take a rubber band and we're going to hook that onto the hook on the other side of that nose piece. If you move that away to the side, it'll allow you to put that hook in, bring it round and hook it over this little lug at the bottom and let this come back. And take another rubber band and you can push this to the side to expose this little hook again, and put in your other rubber band and let this one slip under this lever. You might like to use a toothpick to help guide that on. And you can pull this down and over this lug as well. So these bands will return our lever to the center. So when we push it this way, it springs back to the center. When we push it this way, it springs back to the center. Be careful that you haven't loosened up this pushing piece. We want that to be a strong join. Now we can put our backboard onto our base. Apply some glue to these edges. Set that aside to dry. In the meantime, we can do our drawer. Take the base of the drawer, sand off any tabs. Take the side pieces, sand off any tabs. And the back piece. And apply some glue to the edges. Make sure your tab is to the back. Clean away any excess glue. You don't want to glue your drawer into the base. It has to move in and out. Take the front piece, sand away any tabs. Apply some glue. Press on the front of the drawer. Set that aside for 30 minutes to dry. So make sure you've given everything a decent amount of time to dry, about 1 hour at least. That makes sure that this little pushing lug is firmly secure. Then you can push in your drawer and test out the motion. So when you turn it, you want to put your finger in the hole in the drawer and your thumb over here. You don't want to push down on the top because that can pinch on this moving gear, making it a bit harder to turn. So it's best to hold it like this and let your tortoise walk around, and he should push on this little lever and that will make the numbers increment. And if you turn him the other way, then the numbers should decrement down backwards. If you find that the tortoise isn't quite pushing this lever far enough, and that number isn't turning, then you can put some spaces on this piece to allow the tortoise to push it a bit further until this little tooth engages and holds that number wheel in its next position. So you can take some of this foam pad provided and measure out a 5mm by 12mm rectangle and measure 2 of those. Then you can cut those shapes out. Peel off the backing and stick one on each side of the little lever arm. And that will cause your tortoise to push that lever just a little bit further. If the mechanisms in here are too wobbly and slipping out of place, then you'll need to take this long retainer and push it down a bit further and glue it into place to put a bit more pressure on these mechanisms to stop them wobbling out of alignment, but you still want to keep them free enough to move freely, so don't squeeze them too tightly. You need to push on this arm a bit tighter and probably secure that with a bit of glue. Just a bit of wet water on your brush to let the glue wick in and retain this piece. If you find the glue on this piece is already too dry to push it down further, then you can cut some ordinary baking paper into a shape like this, and this works well as a packer, and you can cut as many as you need to form packers. And this is nice because it's got the smooth waxed surface, so it works well for lubricating the moving parts. And you can slide this in behind this retainer, so that puts a bit more pressure on this piece, which then puts pressure on this piece, which stops everything wobbling about, and you can put as many packers as you need. But hopefully you won't have to do this if you can refrain from gluing this piece until you've had a chance to play around with getting it pushed down to just the right spot. If you find that this piece, this pawl, is slipping down and getting stuck underneath of this piece, then it's probably that this piece is a little bit wobbly and it's not staying in position. So that would mean that the little circular retainer just above it is needing to be pushed down a bit further to stop this piece wobbling. So push that retainer down a bit further to put a bit more pressure on this piece, and then make sure that this still can move freely, and then you can secure that circular retainer with some glue. So just put some glue above that retainer, being careful not to glue in place our pawl underneath. We want to keep that moving freely. and take a wet brush and allow the glue to wick in to the crack in between this long retainer and the circular retainer underneath it. So just push that down again to make sure it's holding this piece firmly, and then let the glue dry. So for every turn of this ones wheel, your tens wheel will increment by one number, and it works in both directions. Congratulations, that's all finished. So if you want, you can store things in the drawer, and to keep track of how many items you have in your drawer, you can turn your tortoise and let him count how many things are in your drawer. If you take something out, then you can wind him backwards so you can count down. So you always know how many items are in your drawer. You might also like to use it as a way to keep track of a score in a game, or just as your own mechanical pet tortoise. All of the different animal kits in the Gearbox Pet series can join together. That way you can make them move all together. So I like to do this by putting them at evenly spaced intervals around their circular path. So I have the tortoise on the left, and I have him in the top left corner. I have the bird in the middle at the bottom, and the fish on the right to the right top corner. And here's how you join them up. So first you want to mesh this small gear in with the large gear teeth in the pet to the right, and at the same time you want to interlace these two pieces with these two pieces, so the top piece is going in between. So mesh the gears and then interlace. You might need to rotate this a little bit to get the gear teeth lined up. And there we go, so the gear teeth are lined up, and our parts are interlaced at the back. That allows you to slide it right in and let it drop down. And we can do the same. So mesh those gear teeth, interlace the pieces at the back, slide them in and let them drop down. And now they'll all move together as one unit. Thanks for making our Gearbox Pets.